Now, the United States has revealed its biggest trade irritants with Canada. In its annual report, the U.S. Trade Representative laid out quite a long list. It includes provincial rules around alcohol, the federal government's Buy Canadian policy, the Online Streaming Act, and enforcement of forced labor import policies. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc was asked about this list today. He says the government was not surprised.
Not a surprise to us. Some elements on the list that were released yesterday, in fact, have been resolved. Others we're working on with the United States. Our job is to continue to do the work necessary to support Canadian industries and Canadian workers. And as recently as this week, we continued high-level collaborative discussions with the American officials.
The Power Panel is here. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. And in our Ottawa studio here is Tim Powers, who has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Welcome, everyone. Sherelle, I'm going to start with you. Oh, actually, first I want to say we'll be keeping our ear out, of course, for any update on the launch of the Artemis II. Currently, everything is a go for tonight. I'm sure we were all wondering. But first, let's kick off with the panel. Sherelle, that long list of irritants, what do you make of the length of it, considering we're in the second year of this trade war?
Yeah, it's consistent, which I suppose is a good thing.
And rare.
Yeah. Very, yeah. You're used to seeing such, everything being very unpredictable and what now from the U.S. administration. So it is a bit of, and it's like when you read through the list, you're like, oh, okay, here are all the ways Canada is protecting its own domestic environment, while we, as the United States, are trying vociferously to protect and draw, things back to our own domestic environment. So yes, there are some things in that list that I actually do think, and I'm sure the government probably thinks, okay, hey, if we address some of these things, that might help things along in terms of talking to the Americans and even just better business practices when it comes to things like enforcing forced labor provisions and those types of things. Like, nobody can really fault the U.S. for pointing that out, despite the fact that there are many things that we could point to the U.S. for as well. But it does help, and it does entrench, domestic sectors, people who want to know what are the big issues that are being discussed around these tables, right now, and as we get closer to the summer when the review really kicks up in earnest. So it's good that it is consistent and everybody kind of knows what's coming. Of course, you always have to be aware of something that could come out of left field.
Yes, you do. So it's a clear window into what they're going to be dealing with. Amanda, some of them are not new, though, right? So we're talking like dairy, Online Streaming Act, Canadian requirements, sovereign cloud data storage. What does that tell us, since some of these are long-standing, about any progress that has or has not been made up until this point?
Yeah, well, and I'll build a little bit off of what Sherelle said. It's not just a current list of irritants, the way that it's been framed. It's like a preview of their negotiating agenda. And so that's very clear. You can think of it as like the opening bid in the next round of negotiations. And again, not a lot of surprises there. As you pointed out, supply management back on the table again, despite the fact that, those rules comply with CUSMA, and those are rules that were obviously negotiated by Trump himself. So it's like, here we go again. But then, and then we look at things like data. Is the next trade war about steel, or is it about data? Like the digital push for like digital information. I think that that's an interesting one to continue to watch. Procurement, I found fascinating. The U.S. taking aim at Canada for Buy Canada procurement, when of course the U.S. is the largest perpetrator of this, and U.S. companies are still getting major contracts in Canada. So I think that, as Sherelle said, there weren't a lot of surprises here. I think that the way that the minister framed his press conference to remind Canadians that these are ongoing discussions, that they're constructive discussions, and I think also to share with Canadians the way that we're saying it here today is that, it's not like we're going to be getting, hopefully not getting, everything is unpredictable, of course, of this administration, but it's not like we're going to be getting any big surprises. These are the things that are already being worked on behind the scenes.
In terms of that, Tim, some of the things are not surprise. Most of them are not surprises. Definitely, some of the irritants are things that are not within the federal government's control, like the liquor bans by the provinces. But also, what is in control is the Canadian procurement policies, as Amanda talked about. Although I think we all can recognize the president very much as well. It's okay if I do that. By Americans, okay, but by Canadians, not. But if those are two that are mentioned, is that a sign that those are actually working because they've clearly got the attention of the American administration, Tim, or is it actually a red flag?
I think the booze certainly has. We've heard that on a number of occasions, the irritation. And they're getting a lot of domestic pressure. The bourbon people in Kentucky are all over the national government in Washington to open that up. I'm sure California wine producers are as well, too. Not that Trump would care as much about the California wine producers as he does the Kentuckians, just because of the way the votes work in the United States. But look, as my friends have said here, this is just a roadmap, right? It's what you can trade off, what you cannot trade off. I'm glad that Jeremy Hansen is not on the list. It wouldn't shock me that the president with the last minutes to go would put our wonderful historic astronaut in on that list. But I think, look, you have to look at that list and look at today's launch and look at what's happening militarily and think that the environment could be a bit better for Canada. I mean, Trump, like other presidents, cares a lot about space. The fact that we have a senior Canadian, the first non-American on that flight, is a big deal. And it happening at this time shouldn't be overlooked. The fact that today, deliberately, I'm sure, the government has gone around across the country. You got Dom LeBlanc in New Brunswick making a military announcement. All his ministers have been doing that today is a message saying, all right, America, you know what? Yeah, you got these irritants. How about these bigger things that you say you care so much about? We're doing stuff here. First time things have been done there, arguably, in a very long time. So there's a lot of gamesmanship going on. There's the list, and then there's what's happening.
Jordan, what leverage does Canada have, do you think, after looking at this list?
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to say, I think there's a couple ways that you can look at this list, and one of them is as a list of leverage. This is really exposing some of the points that the United States has found to be pain points in these negotiations. And I would argue also that it's probably a little bit more information than we've got from the Canadian government to date about the state of the negotiations.
That happens often, yes.
Which has not been unusual in this. But this shows really the places where the United States is feeling the pinch. And I think that we can foresee, particularly with the war happening in Iran and in the wider Middle East, and as energy prices are soaring, that those questions are actually going to become even more important. There's really no way for Trump to pursue his manufacturing reshoring strategy without strong, accessible energy of a reasonable price. And so Canada becomes a lot more interesting in that regard. On the flip side of that coin, though, I think this list also shows some of the political vulnerabilities that this government is going to have in launching these trade negotiations, because there are things on that list, things like cultural protections, like supply management, like Buy Canadian, that have very strong political support either all across the country or in particular regions. And so if they are on the table for negotiation, that comes potentially with a heavy political cost here in Canada for Prime Minister Carney.
Sherelle, forced labor, you mentioned it on the list. Is that doesn't sound like leverage to me. That sounds like that is one of our vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the. But it's also, I suppose you could call it an opportunity if you want to take it.
Address it.
If you want to address it, yeah. If you want to look at that crass view of like, well, I guess we could finally, address and enforce
it, yes.
labor, forced labor, if that'll make the Americans happy, that's something that should be done, for various other reasons. So you could say that, sure, you give us this, we give you that on forced labor. that is an option. There are some, I think there are some vulnerabilities. We have seen there's things like the digital services tax, which has been repealed now. At the time that this list was compiled, it wasn't, and that's something that the Carney government basically gave in on. So I'm sure that's also at the back of people's minds when it comes to things like the Online Streaming Act, et cetera. Like, are these things where the government might be still kind of wobbly?
Amanda, in terms of forced labor, you do have this push from the U.S., not only by putting it on the list, but also as part of this Section 301, 301 investigation. Just seen on the list today, knowing that investigation came out of the not-so-great ruling from the Supreme Court for Trump, that this is another way for them to be able to bring back the tariffs. Seeing it on the list today, should we just be bracing for the inevitable? Is that tariff on its way?
I imagine like that's the feeling. That's certainly the sense I think that people have when they read it. And I think Sherelle makes a good argument that there's other reasons to consider. And that becomes, maybe a vulnerability against areas where there's leverage, like our integrated supply chains, like the stability advantage that Canada has as a reliable rules-based trading partner, while the US is politicized on trade. But I do think that there are real vulnerabilities here as well. And, we've sort of glazed over them a little bit, but supply chain is a real vulnerability here for this government. This is a constant pressure from the US. This is politically protected, so very difficult to put on the table. And I think it feels even more highlighted to me. And then digital policy as well. Like I do think going back to that, the kind of the analogy of will we be negotiating, will the next trade war be on steel? Will it be on data? This is a vulnerability for Canada also. So it's not like we've heard this all before, so it's going to be okay. We're going to get to the negotiating table and we already know the chips. And certainly some of the irritants.
Amanda, I'm just going to cut you off a little bit just because we're really running low on time. I want to get Tim and Jordan in quick 30-second takes from you guys on this.
Again, no surprises here. What will be fascinating to watch is how time helps us and how it changes that list. Does that list get bigger as we get closer because the president is losing more control of power in the U.S. or not? Time works for us now. May not work for the list, but it works for us in terms of negotiating potentially.
Is that the truth, Jordan? Some people accuse this government of ragging the puck a little bit. Is that working in the favor?
Time also harms us, though, because, of course, we know that investment decisions are being made by companies right now where they are not investing in Canada because of the uncertainty brought by the tariff war. And we know the longer the tariff fight goes on, the more Canadians, particularly in those sectors that have been targeted, are losing their jobs. So time also is our enemy in this regard. And I think there's a real risk with President Trump that as he feels the pressure leading into the midterms, he becomes less rational, not more rational.
Prophetic, perhaps, those
I
words.
Hope not.
Thank you, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Jordan Likeness, and Sherelle Evelyn.